Hello viewers, thank you for joining me. I have to be honest, I enjoyed this show all the way through, but after finishing the last episode, I spent a few days questioning whether I really wanted to write a review for it. But maybe needed is a better word than wanted. I felt similarly after watching One Punch Man, which I didn't end up reviewing. It had been so talked about already that I didn't really feel like there was anything left to be said. But then, Yuri on Ice was not so universally liked, especially after the Anime Awards Crunchyroll held that year, and I'm sure there's someone out there who has put off watching it even longer than me, so here's my take on this show. With a few spoilers, but nothing after episode 7. Yuri on Ice brings its viewers into the world of men's figure skating, where our main character, Yuri Katsuki, has just finished last in the year's Grand Prix final. He considers this to be a crushing defeat. This still means he's the 6th-ranked male figure skater in the world, which I think is pretty impressive, but we'll be spending plenty of time on Yuri's mindset later. Unable to drag himself out of this slump, he doesn't even qualify for the rest of the year's competitions, and decides to return home to Hasetsu, the rundown little tourist town in Japan where he grew up. It's here that he reconnects with Yuko, a childhood friend who now runs the ice rink where they used to practice as kids. He tells her that he was losing his passion for skating, and so started practicing something for fun in his spare time. And that something just happens to be the free skate program of Viktor Nikiforov, a Russian skater who's kind of viewed as a living legend in the figure skating world. He's just won his 5th consecutive world championship, and Yuri has spent half his life idolizing him. So, the perfect choice to remind him of why he fell in love with figure skating in the first place. Except, he doesn't realize that Yuko's 3 daughters were also at the rink that day. Not only did they see his performance, they recorded it, and the video goes viral soon after they upload it. And this is what really gets the ball rolling. The video is seen by none other than Viktor Nikiforov, and the living legend himself spontaneously shows up at Yuri's family's onsen, announcing his intentions to be Yuri's new coach. Right off the bat, though, things are complicated a little bit. Viktor is followed to Japan by Yuri Plisetsky, another Russian skater who trains under the same coach. He took gold in the junior division, and Viktor promised to choreograph a program for him if he did, so this Yuri, who's very driven and aggressive, is determined to drag Viktor back to Russia if he has to. Because having 2 main characters named Yuri would be very confusing, Yuri Katsuki's sister nicknames the Russian Yuri Yurio, so that's how we'll differentiate between the 2 here. For all his other qualities, Viktor can be a bit of an airhead, or at the very least his interpersonal skills are not always what they could be. He's now promised to work with both of them, and decides the only fair way to settle this is to set up a little competition between the Yuris. He will choreograph a program for both of them, and the winner is the one he'll work with. And though it stems from Viktor carelessly forgetting a promise, this first arc is really an excellent introduction to all 3 of our main characters. Because Viktor may seem like a bit of an airhead sometimes, but the way he goes about setting up this competition is very smart. And to truly be able to explain why that is, I have to talk a little more about Yurio first. I love the way Yurio is portrayed, and I think that had a lot to do with the fact that most of the other characters are adults. This will be his first year in the senior division. He's a very talented skater, but he's only 15, and he acts 15. In another show, among a cast of characters his own age, Yurio would be that one character who's super edgy and tough. But in this show, surrounded by older characters who can see through his bullshit and may have even experienced similar stages themselves, he comes across as a little desperate to look tough. He's the underdog here, and he wants to be taken seriously, but his aggression is so over the top, snapping at every little thing, that the people he sees on a regular basis quickly learn not to take his anger seriously. Yuri is the one people tend to think of whenever anxiety is brought up, but Yurio clearly has plenty of insecurities of his own. Insecurities that he can't let anyone else see, as he's under an extreme amount of pressure to be the best, and Victor asks him to do exactly that. Victor gives the two Yuris the same theme, love, and choreographs two programs to two different arrangements of the same song. He tasks Yurio with agape, the pure, unconditional sort of love you'd expect from a parent, basically asking him to bare his soul to the world and be completely honest for once. Meanwhile, he gives Yuri, who's very quiet, a little awkward, and generally just a very private person, the program for Eros, which is meant to represent sexual confidence and desire. He challenges them both to explore the parts of themselves they're least comfortable with, which I thought was a pretty brilliant way of introducing them to the audience, especially because we're working on limited time with only 12 episodes. I don't want to say it all goes downhill from here, but let's just say that no other arc is ever explored quite as thoroughly as the first 3 episodes. Yuri ends up getting to keep Victor as his coach, but the way the Hot Springs on Ice competition was resolved was very interesting to me too. Technically speaking, as far as executing the step sequences and landing his jumps go, Yuri doesn't skate his program perfectly, and Yurio does. However, Yurio was absolutely miserable during his performance, and he couldn't bring himself to express the sort of vulnerability required of agape. So he leaves of his own accord without waiting to hear the results. Yuri was able to accomplish the real goal of this challenge, getting in touch with this other side of himself, and Yurio knows he was outperformed where it counted. He may be very proud, but this was a great example of just how hard on himself he is. After this point, nearly the entire series is swallowed up by the official competitions, which brings us to one of the main things people loved about Yuri on Ice, its portrayal of anxiety. In general, I found Yuri to be a very well-developed character. He felt very real, and part of that is that he's painfully aware of his own shortcomings. It's not skill he lacks, but confidence, and he knows this, but it doesn't stop the pressure from causing him to self-destruct each year. And now there's more at stake than ever, because he fears Victor will no longer want to be his coach if he doesn't do well, especially because Victor could be well on his way to a 6th world championship by now if he hadn't taken time off to coach him. It's not just stage fright, it's feeling like he's let everyone down if he doesn't succeed. I think that would be enough to break anyone, but he hasn't quit yet. Yuri's mindset was fascinating to me all the way through, maybe because I'm not used to seeing something that feels quite this real in fiction. Yuri is usually a mess right before he competes, but it's never portrayed in that overdramatic, jumping at every little sound sort of way that anxiety in fiction usually is. He just gets very quiet and withdrawn, which makes a lot of sense. His biggest problem, after all, is that he internalizes everything. There are a lot of louder, more memorable scenes between Yuri and Victor later on, but my favorite scene is a quiet one during episode 4, when they're still just getting to know each other. This was the scene where Yuri's character first really struck a chord with me. He talks about how he has a really hard time relying on other people and accepting help. He never opens up to others because he doesn't want to be seen as weak. Yuri spent 5 years training in America, where the general atmosphere is a lot more open to talking about your emotions. He tells Victor about a day when one of his rink mates got pretty seriously hurt. In the hospital, one of his other friends tried to give him a hug, and he just reflexively pushed her away, because it felt like she was intruding on emotions that she didn't have any right to. Like I said, it's a very small, quiet scene. I could understand how someone else could pass right over it without consequence, but it was something I could really relate to, and I think it says a great deal for the writer's credibility that their main character's greatest struggle is his own self-doubt, yet he doesn't come across as weak. He has a hard time accepting comfort from others because he doesn't want to be rescued. Really, all he needs is the knowledge that someone else believes in him so that he can believe in himself. One of the first major things Victor does right as his coach is to push him to decide on his own music for his programs, something he's always left up to his coaches in the past. Which was nice to see because, honestly, Victor doesn't have a ton of shining moments as a coach, which was actually a good thing for him as far as character development goes, and which brings us to the second main thing that got people talking about Yuri on Ice: the way Yuri and Victor's relationship develops as the series progresses. Early on, it's a lot about Yuri coming to see Victor as a real person and not a literal skating god, so his inexperience as a coach and zero clue what to do about Yuri's anxiety help Yuri to realize that the legendary Viktor Nikiforov is, in fact, a regular human being with flaws just like the rest of us. Which was an important first step. But I think you all know that's not what I'm really talking about. What really got people's attention was that by the end of episode 7, their relationship had turned romantic. There's a lot to unpack here, and I'm going to try to take this step by step. Let's start with the least serious component: the general atmosphere in the anime community where shipping is involved. I reviewed Free recently and described it as the Yuri on Ice of a few years earlier as far as shipping was concerned, but that's really just one example. Yuri on Ice had come on the heels of quite a few really popular sports anime, where shipping a bunch of the main male characters was really prominent among the fanbase. And even then, it's not like that was anything new. But I'm sure that most of even the most diehard fans of those pairings were aware that they were never going to actually see those characters get together in canon. It was just wishful thinking. Yuri on Ice was the show where that actually happened. All those fans insisting that there was something more between Yuri and Victor were suddenly validated. If you weren't around to see the anime community all but burst into flames from this development, well, I'll just let you imagine what that was like. If Yuri on Ice was popular before, it was practically inescapable afterwards. But this was a big deal on a more objective level, too. How many anime can you name where the main characters are a gay couple that wasn't marketed as a yaoi or yuri from the get-go? Including this one, I can think of 2, and though the second one is quite a few years old at this point, I'm pretty sure it never got as popular as Yuri on Ice. On the other side of things, well, we're all living in the same world. I probably don't have to tell you that it wasn't all confetti cannons and rainbow flags. I'll be honest. The romantic status of their relationship is of the variety that's confirmed in interviews after the fact, but vague enough on screen to have been passionately debated at the time. In a roundabout way, this may have done us some good, because a large percentage of portrayals of homosexual relationships in anime are fetishized or just over-sexualized, and despite Victor showing up naked and urging Yuri to find his true Eros, that's really not the case here. But I have no doubt that this was really more of a marketing strategy than anything else, not wanting to alienate the viewers who may not have been so excited about this development. But some of it, at least, may also go back to one of the problems with this show in general. There just wasn't enough time to develop most things, to be honest. There's a big cast of colorful characters, but at the end of 12 episodes, I'd say only the 2 Yuris are really fully developed characters. Victor gets to narrate episode 10, but our knowledge of his past and motivations still leaves something to be desired. There was an interesting little scene early on where they talk about how he was losing his inspiration, how his audience had gotten so used to his success that they were almost impossible to impress these days. But we never really hear about that again, and I would have liked to see it followed up on. I mentioned that after episode 4, it's mostly just one competition after another, so no, we don't get to see the aftermath of the kiss where they talk about and define their relationship on screen. But we also don't get to see any further training Yuri does to prepare, and for someone like me, who still doesn't really understand figure skating well enough to, say, differentiate between the jumps on screen as I see them, this makes it hard to gauge whether Yuri's really making progress. or the difference in skill between some of the other skaters who you may only see for one performance. You're not left totally out to dry. Yuri's parents are really well-meaning and supportive, but barely understand the sport themselves, so the anime does make an effort to explain how the competitions are structured and how the scoring works. But, well, let's put it this way. With free, the swimming was pretty straightforward. There were 4 styles, and it was a race. Here, you might benefit from doing a little outside research. So what conclusion have I come to? Yuri on Ice did some things very well, and others not so much. Like any other anime, really. Personally, I enjoyed it. There was enough left to be expanded on that I've joined the legion of fans crossing my fingers for a season 2, of which there has been conflicting information. The final episode ends with the hopeful note of "see you next level," which is a different note than all the other episodes ended on. This could be referring to the movie that's been announced, but I've read one interview stating that this will most likely address Yuri's journey before he met Victor, which doesn't sound like the next level to me, so I guess I'll just keep my hopes up. At the end of this all, can I definitively say that this was the best anime of its year? No, but I've hardly watched even a handful of the shows that came out in 2016. Would I say it's worth checking out if you've been putting it off? Yes. Even if you don't want to analyze it quite this deeply, Yuri on Ice is a lot of fun, with a cast that you can tell really enjoyed their roles, which can make all the difference. A lot of heartfelt moments and some really good music, so I would say it's worth watching to make your own opinions about. Thank you for watching.